thank you very much. I very much enjoyed the book. I don't even know where to begin. Let's maybe start. How did you come up with the idea of writing this book? How was the process that led you there? I mean, was there any point in time where you said, well, if I write this book, I'm always going to be the guy who wrote the Bitcoin book, and if it doesn't work out, people will know that I wrote that book?
Actually, I had not thought of that scenario, but it's. I don't think it's not going to work out. Let's be honest, because I don't. But who knows? No, I mean, the reason that I decided to write it was just because I'd been following it for so long, and everybody I know was, 2016 and 17. After 3, 4, 5 years of everybody I know laughing at me as, oh, that's the weird Bitcoin guy. 2015, 16, and 17 is when they all started wanting to become friends with me again. And even say, hey, tell me more about this Bitcoin thing. So you have to explain everything to everybody. And then you realize, maybe I should just write it down into an explanation. And initially, actually, I probably shouldn't be saying this in public, but my original plan was to just have a brief sort of 30-page book and to do an online course with it and, to have them both online. I wasn't planning on really doing a proper book. But I decided in February, I think it was, I decided I was going to do 1,000 words a day until I finished this. And I was doing about 1,500 on average. I ended up writing almost all of it in 2 months because all of this stuff has just been piling up in my mind and nobody was interested. But then when everybody was interested, okay, you people are interested? All right, here you go. There's 100,000 words for you. And I just couldn't stop writing, so it came out.
A very prominent part of your book is a very thorough critique of basically the whole institution of economics, connected to the central banks and the monetary policy. Before we dive into it, I want to ask you the reception you got from the mainstream, so to say. Did you expect that? I mean, what happened? You're very active on Twitter. What's the kind of feedback that you get?
Most of the mainstream has more or less been ignoring my book, and that's perfectly fine by me because it's just going to be a waste of time to try and get into arguments with most people who are, decidedly set against Bitcoin. There's a large number of people who are just, at this point, becoming professional Bitcoin bashers. That's what they do. People like Nouriel Roubini, their entire life is just sit and talk about why Bitcoin's bad. And there's no point in having any sort of discussion with people who are just hell-bent on refusing this. So I have to say that the reason that I was just, if you've read my book, you'll know that it doesn't really pull punches. It's me just basically speaking my mind as if I was talking to some of my closest friends. And that's going to make a lot of people angry. And the reason I just decided that, I'm not going to be diplomatic about it is because this isn't a popularity context. I'm not running for election. I'm not trying to please everyone, and I'd rather just tell it like it is. And the people who are not going to be happy with it are not going to be happy with it, whether I'm nice to them or not. So I decided to take off the gloves.
You talked about Bitcoin being, a medium that you can save money in, but you also talked about the whole system of being an alternative to central banking. Mm-hmm. So 99% of the economists and people I talk to would tell me, I didn't even know that we were looking for an alternative. I understand, of course, where you're coming from, but if it's an alternative, it's also a danger, right? Where do you see the next step? Do you really think that we're going to wake up in 2 years and Bitcoin will be the world's money and everybody will be happy?
I hope so, but no. No, I don't think it'll happen in 2 years. There's a view within Bitcoin circles of something called hyper-Bitcoinization, which is our version of the apocalypse, but in a pleasant way. And when hyper-Bitcoinization happens, all of the other monies of the world just collapse, and everybody is begging for Bitcoin or trying to get their hands on Bitcoin, and there's no more any price of Bitcoin because all the other currencies are dead. And, obviously...
that's exactly what the gold bugs will tell you is going to happen tomorrow.
I know, yeah, exactly. And, while it's definitely satisfying to fantasize about that, I think it's not a very realistic example of how it's actually going to happen. And I think I don't mention this scenario in my book because I don't think it'll happen. And I think it's far more likely that what's happening now is just going to continue to grow and people will slowly come to understand that. So, Bitcoin has gone from a weird joke on the internet to being the money of nerds on the internet, and then some libertarians joined, and then now it's, investors are coming in and hedge funds are coming in, and soon more and more people are coming in. It won't be an overnight thing where one day we wake up and, okay, everybody's using Bitcoin. But what we have right now is the central banking system runs about 99.8% of all the monetary transfers in the world run through that. And then we have 0.2% being run on Bitcoin. 0.2% is very small right now. But, if demand for Bitcoin increases, more people want to play this game, more people want to hold it, there's no possibility, as I mentioned, for anybody to make more Bitcoin to satisfy those people. So the only way they can get more of it, or they can get their demand for it is satisfied, is through the price appreciating, which is going to attract more and more and more people. So the way that I see it is, it's likely going to take a long time, because the fundamental impediment to it is just, it's not easy for people to buy Bitcoin. I mean, I know many people who would like to buy in theory, but it's just not easy for them to buy, to find a place, to find a person. There isn't that infrastructure available all over the world. So it needs to spread out, it needs a lot more time. And I don't think it'll be sudden. I think it'll be more of a gradual transition. It's just, you could think of it as being similar to the newspaper versus internet change in the news industry. It's not like one day we woke up and all newspapers died. But over time, newspapers had to adapt, and they got online, and then their businesses became more online. Some of them couldn't adapt, went out of business. I think we're going to witness something more gradual like that. The Bitcoin economy, the Bitcoin standard, and the alternative to the central bank will continue to grow on the side, laughed at and dismissed by the serious economists, and I think that's an excellent gift that they're giving us, because they could have easily killed Bitcoin in the first couple of years through 51% attacks or so on. Now it's probably too late, even if they were serious about it, but they're not even serious about it. So I think it's just going to continue to grow on the side until it becomes more and more normalized. Now, how long it takes, I really don't know. As Hayek says, you can't make set predictions in economics. You can maybe see pattern predictions, but putting dates, I wouldn't do it.
Before we go into the economics of Bitcoin, or the Bitcoin market as it is today, maybe stick with the economics themselves, because what you're talking about here is basically turning the world on its head, right? We go from an inflationary monetary system to a deflationary monetary system. Is that even possible? I mean, one of the main features of an inflationary monetary system is that my wage, it rises every year. Not very much, but a little, like a tiny little bit. In a deflationary monetary system, it would have to fall, right? Or at least the option would have to be there, right? How is that even possible?
I don't think that the wage would fall in a deflationary monetary system. The raise that you would get is that your wage stays the same, but the prices rise. The prices fall. So effectively, your real wage increases.
But how about unions? I mean, how do you explain this to a union?
Well, I mean, the only reason this became a problem, and this is, I mean, if you read Keynes's theories, essentially all of the rationalization for it is, if you don't do what I'm saying, and it's almost, you can almost feel him saying, look, this is all stupid, and I know it, but if you don't do what I'm saying, then the unions will eat us all, and the unions will go communist. And the reality is the only reason this threat of the unions was there in the first place was because of the inflationary policies that they had adopted earlier. I mean, the inflation in Britain had started with World War I and all across Europe. And then after World War I, Britain refused to go back on gold at the old parity, and that's what made wages very low, and that's what made people demand higher wages. And so the way that they gave them higher wages was through inflation. And that's really, remove all of the smoke and mirrors of all the equations and the math and all of the complications that Keynes adds. This is it. This is all of what Keynesian economics is. How do we give the workers wages that are nice? Keynes just thinks workers care about numbers. They care about having more numbers. They want to see big zeros on their paycheck. They don't care about what it buys. So let's just print more money that gives them higher wages, and then we can, get back to equilibrium at a higher wage level and a higher price level. well, you could do the same thing without having to inflate and get stuck on and have a lower wage level and a lower price level. So I don't really see that rationale. I mean, you know, the example of the 19th century in Europe in particular, and in the US, which I talk about extensively in my book, shows you how the dangers of a deflationary economy are really not real. I mean, there's a reason this was called La Belle Époque in all over the world. This was, you know, the time when modern civilization spread out the most all over the world. Things were pretty good at that time. Quality of life had improved most drastically all over the world. The spread of electricity and sewage and all of these things and the elimination of diseases, all of that happened under a monetary system whose supply, under a monetary medium whose supply grew very slowly and much slower than the economy grew. It was not a problem because simply prices drop downward, people are able to afford more, and life gets better. And then that allows people to save more and accumulate more and more capital into the future.
Do you think that because you started off and you wanted to start in Vienna because you consider yourself an Austrian economist, right? And Austrian economists have been the few that I know have always been saying, you know, that someday our time will come, you know. I bet I mean, many have also written it and then died, and the time never came. Their work still ring true, which is important. Do you think that the monetary system, the easy money monetary system, has influenced or even corrupted the profession of economics? And do you think that a change to a hard monetary system that you were describing will change it in another direction?
Very much so, absolutely. I think I could have said that to your earlier question. The reality is, you know, the reason it's pointless to address this towards the economics profession is, as I don't know who it was who said it, you can't convince a man of something if his salary depends on the opposite of it. So today, modern economics education is almost entirely financed and controlled by central banks all over the world. And it begins with the US, where the central bank in the US pays something like $4 billion a year to fund research and grants all over the universities. It's practically impossible to be a monetary economist in the US and not work with the Fed and not get funding from the Fed. I mean, there's probably less than 10 monetary economists in the entire US who are not, in one way or the other, reliant on federal funding. So, you know, you have to keep this in mind when you see all of these economists get on TV and talk about how Bitcoin is bad. Well, you know, this is like asking, you know, telegraph operators about what they think of the internet. It puts them out of a job specifically. And I think, you know, as somebody who started this, I was doing my PhD in Columbia University, being taught by some of these high-profile professors that are now going on TV and bashing Bitcoin. I studied that stuff, and I was doing my PhD in it, and it was not convincing. And having read the Austrian economics, I found it a much better way of understanding the world, and it's a much better way of understanding how the world is changing. And I think the reason Keynesian economics continues to survive has nothing to do with its validity, or has nothing to do with its, you know, its ability to explain events or its ability to change things. It's just simply what people in power want to hear. And Keynesian economics was not invented by Keynes. I mean, the US in 1931 and 1932 was already doing what we think of as Keynes's ideas. Keynes was just the man who came and put a book out there with his name that said, you know, this is what you should be doing, and then that gave them the intellectual justification for doing what they wanted to do. But, I mean, I think Bitcoin, were it to succeed, it's a small little moral victory, and it's going to be something that, you know, economists like me will enjoy a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter all that much. But yeah, one of the nice things that it'll do is hopefully it'll destroy the mess that is Keynesian and modern economics and return us to sound 19th century Austrian economics, hopefully.
You did also, you know, criticize monetarists because they, like Keynesians, argue for a management of the money supply. But didn't Milton Friedman is a famous monetarist, and he basically saw Bitcoin coming, didn't he?
Yeah, it's an interesting debate. There's an interesting discussion by Friedman where he discusses something like Bitcoin, but what he discusses is the cash aspect of Bitcoin. The idea that this is a currency online that you can use to pay other people untraceably without people knowing where it is and so on. And that's the interesting part about it. He did not discuss it from the perspective of a monetary system. From his monetary economics, Milton Friedman, I think, is a much better propagandist than an economist. Or putting it another way, Milton Friedman, the propagandist, is a much better economist than Milton Friedman, the economist. Because Milton Friedman, the propagandist, talks about, wage controls and minimum wage and price controls and how these things are bad. But Milton Friedman, the economist, spent 90% of his life talking about money with all of his phantasmagorical theories about money supply management and so on. And, fundamentally, they all come down, all of his theories, even though he's heavily influenced by the Austrians, and he claims to be influenced by the Austrians, but fundamentally, all of his monetarist theories. And I think this is the only reason that you and I have heard of Milton Friedman, and he's not just some obscure American college professor in some little college in the middle of nowhere. The reason he became famous is because, he was not going on. He said, we are all Keynesians now. In the 60s, he said, nobody doubts the idea that the government should manage the money supply in order to do recovery. That's it. So he had to submit to that. He had to accept that. And all of his work in economics and, his positivist stuff, methodologically, is completely worthless, obviously. All of that mathematics stuff that they do. As Austrians, we believe it's somewhere beneath astrology and somewhere near tarot cards in terms of its intellectual validity, with a much shorter track record than both. So obviously, we can't really take that economic stuff seriously. And the results of it is just, all of his economic ideas fundamentally come down to money supply management. One of his ideas was about, setting a set growth rate for the money supply, that it would be algorithmic, but it would still be the government that controls it. It's a complicated answer.
I mean, just to get this straight, do you really think that that when Bitcoin survives and thrives, that we do not need government fiat currencies at all anymore? Or is there a world where both can coexist peacefully?
I mean, they're coexisting peacefully so far. It could last for a while, but I think in the long run, money just wants to be one. Money, there is absolutely no benefits from having two currencies in a single place. And if you look at any time when there has been more than one monetary medium in a place, the only reason that one survived is because of government enforcement. Like if you left on its own, the market will just choose one money. Like another example I talk about in my book is that by the end of the 19th century, almost everywhere in the world, gold was demonetized. Nobody was using, silver was demonetized. Nobody was using silver as money. Everybody was using gold, because thinking of it this way, the world is much better if we all use one money than if half of us use one and then another half use another, because then there's more exchange. So naturally, we're going to tend towards having one money. Naturally, we're going to tend towards having the money that holds its value better. And nobody wants, if you have the option of having a money that appreciates and an option of money that depreciates, people are very self-interested, and they will choose what they're self-interested. So I don't think this is sustainable as an equilibrium, in a sense.
But the system as we have it today, right now, so we have fiat currency in Europe. That is, we're not in Venezuela, we're not in Zimbabwe, so the inflation is bearable. Yeah. We have a very open and liberal gold market. I can buy physical gold anytime I want. Maybe blockchain will even follow that process. And then we have cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin. So if I want, I can put my money into appreciating assets, but I can also use depreciating assets for my everyday life. It's not so bad, is it?
No, it's wonderful. I love the fact that people will still accept the dollars that I have. It's great. For as long as people will do it, it's wonderful. But eventually, they're going to wise up. Eventually, they're going to realize that this isn't a good deal. And people are going to start wanting less and less of the bad money. So I think, it's a lose-lose situation for governments. If they just let the market decide, if they don't interfere and let the market decide, I think the market will just naturally lead to more and more economic activity being taking place in Bitcoin, because people will adopt it more, and also because the limited supply means it will just keep appreciating. On the other hand, if they try to fight it, if they make Bitcoin illegal, this is the best thing that they could do for Bitcoin, because all that it does is, first of all, it'll demonstrate that they can't stop it. So, people will wake up and they'll see, oh, our government has made Bitcoin illegal. well, let's go on the internet and see what's happening with Bitcoin. And oh look, every 10 minutes a new block is being generated as if our government doesn't matter. Hang on a second, maybe our government doesn't matter after all. So, you won't be able to stop it. All that you'll do if you stop it is that you'll just show yourself as being completely impotent by trying to fight it, number one. Secondly, you're doing the best advertisement for it, which is if a government tells its banks, don't serve anybody who uses Bitcoin, don't let anybody use your accounts to buy Bitcoin, well, then everybody's just realizing, hang on a second, I have my money in the bank and you're telling me I can't buy this stupid digital toy if I want to buy it? That's not really very encouraging for me, keeping my money in your bank. So people will start maybe buying Bitcoin with their, pocket change here and there and small amounts of money, but it's just proving the value proposition of Bitcoin as opposed to government money. So it's a war that I really can't see them winning against Bitcoin. And I think this is why, when people talk about Bitcoin adoption, they think of it in terms of like the iPhone adoption. And, will it be iPhone or Android or IBM or Apple or all of these things? And I don't think of it that way. I think it's a better example of understanding it is that it's like gunpowder. It's something that is not optional or, a luxury or just something that you can afford to choose or not. For a government, I think eventually they're going to face the situation, whereas if you would like to continue to remain as a government, just like in the 19th century, the only way that you could survive as a government was if you had gold in your treasury, you're going to have Bitcoin. You're going to have to join it. And I think, we don't know what's going on right now, but I think central banks might already be beginning to think about this because it's, if you can't beat them, join them. And I think fundamentally, the problem with the sort of view that thinks that governments are just going to ban Bitcoin is that it assumes that all governments are one benevolent conspiracy of all these people sitting together every year and trying to make the world work better. In fact, governments are adversarial, and governments understand that they're competing against each other, and they understand they're looking for every little edge they can get against each other. And so governments will more likely understand the advantage that Bitcoin offers them, and will see the disadvantage that will come to them if they try to fight it. And I think over time, the fears of Bitcoin will become a little bit like the fears of the internet at some point. There was a time in 1995 where all that you heard about the internet was that it was just a place for horrible criminals and child porn and so on and so forth. And yet the internet has outgrown that, and now nobody thinks of it as being just a place for criminals and bad people. And I think Bitcoin is likely to face that fate eventually.
I have so many questions, I don't even know where to start. No, I want to move into the question, but the one question that is on everybody's mind, I think, is why are you so sure it's Bitcoin? Yes, it was the first cryptocurrency, but there are many. When you buy Bitcoin cryptos today, it's easier than a couple of years ago, but it's also harder in the sense that you buy you put in some money, you buy half a Bitcoin, and then you have everybody screaming at you. You need to invest in Ethereum, you need to buy Bitcoin Cash, buy Ripple, everybody, even the media, the media is always to blame. The media tells you there are better projects than Bitcoin. But you seem to be sure that it's the one and the first Bitcoin that's going to take the spotlight forever instead of fiat currency, instead of gold. Why Bitcoin?
Well, it's not entirely just because it is first, although that's part of it. But the real reason is this. The value proposition of Bitcoin is not fast transactions. It's not allowing you to buy your coffee with, saving an extra cent that goes from your credit card to the company that processes it. Nobody is buying Bitcoin because they want to save on transaction fees. And this is not what's driving the growth. This is not what's driving the demand for it. The value proposition of Bitcoin, in my opinion, and I think time has borne this out, is the fact that the monetary supply for it is hard, is unalterable, and nobody can change it. So we're only going to have 21 million Bitcoin, and nobody can change that. And the reason I think Bitcoin became valuable, the reason the value continues to grow, is precisely because it's demonstrated its inability to change. It's demonstrated that nobody controls it. And that's a huge thing, because if there was one person out there who could decide that who could change Bitcoin, then everything I'm saying is completely useless. If tomorrow somebody comes up and says, hypothetically speaking, I have a magic switch that, or they had some malware in the code that everybody is running, and now he can control Bitcoin. Forget everything I said, throw my book away and never talk to me ever again. It's gone, that's pointless. The only reason it matters is because nobody can change it. Nobody can change the supply. Nobody can change the new Bitcoins that are being produced. And we know this because people in Bitcoin, and some of the most influential people in Bitcoin, have spent the last 7, 8 years going insane, trying to change some of the very small metrics of Bitcoin and completely failing at it. And this is what makes Bitcoin different. Bitcoin, and in terms of the person who founded it, all of this perfect storm of somebody founding it, putting the software out there and then disappearing, and the software growing up on its own. I think a good example of it is to think of it as this, like a child that we threw in the jungle. Most likely, if you throw a 1-year-old in the jungle, he'll die. But if he survives, you're gonna have a massive monster. He's gonna be very powerful, and he's not gonna be able to stop. Now, you can't just bring another kid his age, who's now 20 years on, who's lived in a city, and then tell him, go spend a couple of weeks in the jungle and then go fight this guy. It doesn't work that way, right? And all these other coins are exactly like that. All these other coins, it's completely trivial for all the ones that I've ever heard of or researched. There's more than 1,000 of them, and I highly urge you to never waste any time on any of them. But for those of you who had the misfortune of wasting time on these coins, it's completely trivial to identify 2 or 3 people or 1 person for each one of those coins who could literally change whatever they want in that coin within a week. So for instance, Ethereum, there's an Ethereum Foundation. And it's completely trivial for them to change anything in Ethereum, as has been demonstrated over and over and over with all the hard forks that they've done. Ripple is just a centralized, stupid game, and there's a bunch of people running it with their own token. They can do whatever they want with it. They've printed 100 billion, and they have 60 billion on the side that they can do whatever they want with. I could keep going on and on. Name any particular coin.
What about Bitcoin Cash?
Exactly, Bitcoin Cash, another excellent example. I mean, the people who started it were people who started it by changing the Bitcoin software. So they started from the perspective of saying, hey, this isn't something that is sacred, this isn't something that is immutable, we can change it. So if you can change it to make the block size larger, it'll be trivial to change it to make the money supply grow. But if the money supply can grow and change, then the entire value proposition of the thing is gone. And so, the onus of proof is not on Bitcoin to say why it is better than the others. The onus of proof is on all these other coins that are effectively nothing but scams to enrich the people who have made them, to illustrate to others why is it that they can claim to be immutable. You have a foundation and you have a guy who has spent millions, you're financed by bankers who have given you millions and press releases and all of those people. These coins didn't just come out of nowhere. People spent millions on making them happen. Why did they spend those millions? Not for charity, and not because they want a digital currency to be available, because if they wanted one, there's already Bitcoin out there. The only reason they made it is so that they could get rich off of it, and they continue to control it. Now, how can they demonstrably prove or illustrate or credibly show that they can't change the supply? That's the question that any other coin would need to answer before I can take it seriously. And the reality is none of them can do it. And the point is, if none of them can do it, if none of them can demonstrate it, then there's no point behind having this entire blockchain structure and all that expensive stuff. Just have a centralized currency. There's nothing wrong with centralization. Have a centralized currency and let it compete with Bitcoin. It will be more efficient, it will be faster.
Isn't that something that you would expect from the central banks, that they would have centralized currencies to compete with Bitcoin?
Yep, they've been doing it for more than 100 years. That's what they have, centralized currencies that are competing now badly with Bitcoin. So, I think there will be centralized competitors to Bitcoin. That's perfectly fine. I think Bitcoin will win not because it's decentralized. It will win because it's harder. But decentralization and the lack of a central controlling party is what makes this hardness completely, just set in stone. You don't have to worry. You don't have to follow Bitcoin news to find out what's happening if they're going to increase the inflation. If you have dollars, you have to follow Ben Bernanke and all of those people and what they're doing and whether they're increasing the supply. And if you buy any other altcoin, then yeah, you need to always follow what they're doing. But with Bitcoin, get your private key, store your Bitcoins. 20 years from now, You know, if you own, 1/1,000,000 of all the Bitcoins that exist, 20 years from now, you'll still own 1/1,000,000 of all the Bitcoins that exist. That is something that no altcoin can claim. So then altcoins just continue then, and what they have as their selling points are just a bunch of marketing talking points. All these apps and all these things that are supposed to be developed over blockchain technology that people have been talking about for 8-9 years, none of which is coming through.
I think Ben Bernanke has actually been in retirement for a couple of years, but but do you I mean, that would be maybe my last question. You do realize in a world where central banks, like in extremis, where central banks print fiat currency to buy Bitcoin on the open market, we will see Bitcoin prices that will, eye-watering Bitcoin prices. And then we have people who today own 10,000, 100,000 Bitcoins, and most of the vast majority of people don't own any Bitcoin. So how do you answer the already sounding question in my head? How about the inequality in the Bitcoin system?
I think Bitcoin is going to be an excellent solution to the problem of inequality in the world global system, not as it is understood by the sort of, the Marxist take on inequality, which is simply, as I like to call it, anytime you see an economist who studies inequality, you remember this is the child who used to always want to play with other people's toys, no matter how many toys they had. They were the ones who were always unhappy with their own toys. So I don't mean inequality in terms of who has more toys. I don't think that is a problem that needs to be solved. I think, if you have a child who's always looking at other people's toys, the problem is not getting them more toys, the problem is changing their attitude. Or the solution is not getting them more toys, the solution is changing their attitude. And I think what Bitcoin is going to do is going to solve the problem of inequality that is government mandated. The fact that some people don't produce anything of value and yet continue to get money because they have access to the money printers. Whereas other people continue to produce things of value and yet they continue to witness their wealth dissipate because the money printers are devaluing their wealth. So Bitcoin, once the supply is set, or even when most of the supply is there, the only way of making Bitcoin is to do something productive for other people. And so, initially, forget about the initial distribution for a minute, and I'll get back to that. But in the long run, eventually, the only people who will have Bitcoin will be people who are productive. And it doesn't matter how many Bitcoins you hold today. If you got lucky and you mined 1,000 or 100,000 Bitcoin in 2009 or 2010, it won't matter eventually. Well, as the price rises, you're going to be spending. You're going to be spending these, and that's going to be decreasing the amount of Bitcoins that you have. And eventually, your Bitcoins will only stay with you if you're able to be productive, if you're able to produce things of value. Now, on terms of the initial distribution, I think the solution to that is prices. As the price rises, the people who have 1,000 Bitcoin, they become more and more likely to sell. Bitcoiners obviously always joke about, we'll never sell our Bitcoin and hodl to death and hodl for 10 generations. But let's face it, if you bought some Bitcoin for $100 and now they're worth 3 times your annual salary and you're having problems paying off your mortgage or something like that, and your Bitcoins are continuing to appreciate, you are going to sell. Everybody's going to sell. And, people might not like to talk about it on Twitter, but they will sell eventually, and that's perfectly normal.
The one thing that immediately came to mind when I read your chapter about time preference and saving is that the hodl meme actually shows that the people who invest in Bitcoin, they have time, they can wait. Many of them, because I mean, would you agree that the people? It seems like it's this whole speculation thing, but it actually started out with people who actually just wanted to wait and see what happens.
Yes, and so it's about time preference fundamentally. I mean, the people who are, it doesn't matter how many Bitcoins you own. I mean, I've known people who had thousands and hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin, and they sold them or lost them, or because they couldn't really see the value in the long run. In the long run, the people who are going to hold on to their Bitcoins and keep them are the ones who value them the most and the ones who are able to wait the longer. So it's a matter of time preference. But time preference, it can be low or high, but it is never zero. There's nobody in the world who values things, who values things today equally to what they are 10 years or 20 years from now, because you could be dead 10 or 20 years from now. So you prefer present consumption. Everybody is like that. And people get married, people want to buy homes, people want to
Get divorced.
get divorced, exactly. That will take care of a lot of these things. And also, a lot of people will lose their coins. I think people are dismissing that. A lot of people lose a lot of coins. People die without having a good backup, and then the coins are gone.
The most amazing thing, and that's my last statement, and I'm gonna open up the floor. The most amazing argument I read about Bitcoin being a positive thing is that now, if you adopt it in a third world country, in Zimbabwe or in Venezuela, and if only half of what you're saying comes true, we have a solution for the refugee problems, because people will be so rich in Africa that they don't want to come to Europe anymore.
I mean, that whole Bitcoin solves everything meme. I think
No, just for Zimbabwe, not for the rest of the world.
There's this tendency to market Bitcoin as a little bit more than what it is, and it's kind of hard because Bitcoin is so mind-blowing, and for the first few years you're just so taken by it when you start understanding it. But no, if you're not a productive person, and if you're poor and you're not working, Bitcoin is not going to magically change the world so that unproductive people become wealthy. It's not a solution to all of life's problems. The idea that, Africa's just going to overnight become wealthy. I'm not going to stand here and sell you these fictions that, buy Bitcoin so that you save Africa. I mean, obviously, part of Africa's problems obviously have to do with unsound money and with government control of money and hyperinflation. That's a big part of it. That's a big part of the problems everywhere in the world. Obviously Zimbabwe would be much better off if they didn't have all of these things. But I would not stand. I can't really just say that it will solve everything. No, it's just a form of money, but I think it's a form of money that provides much better economic incentives for people to be productive rather than being extractive.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We already have our first question. We have, I think, 1, 3. Okay, we'll start over there.